So now that we've finished collecting our data, we can move on to data analysis. So in step 6, we are given this formula right here, and this describes what we know to be roughly the relationship between pressure and height in Earth's atmosphere. And what we're going to do in step 6 is we're going to create a scatter plot using the data that we just collected, and throughout this activity we're going to see how our model matches up to this known formula. First, let's just talk through the formula. So it says that the measured pressure at a given height is equal to negative rho GH plus the pressure at the ground. Or another way to think about it is that the measured pressure at a given height is going to be equal to the pressure on the ground minus some factor, which is rho g, times the height that you're measuring it at. So what is that factor rho g? You might already know that g is our gravitational acceleration, which we know to be about 9.8 meters per second near the surface of Earth. And rho, which is this symbol right here, that looks kind of like a lowercase p, that represents our air density as measured in kilograms per meter cubed. So before we make our scatter plot, just take a look at this equation and try to think about what this relationship would look like if it were graphed. So you might want to consider whether or not this is a linear relationship between pressure and height, and what does that negative sign tell you about what the relationship looks like. So now we can go ahead and make our plot, and I'm going to be using Google Sheets to do that. So as you can see here, I have my data that I collected using the Arduino Science Journal app now entered into my spreadsheet, and I have height in one column in units of meters and the pressure in another column in units of pascals. So to make our plot, we're going to go ahead and highlight the data by clicking and dragging, and then I'm going to go to the Insert tab at the top of the page, and I'm going to select Chart. And so it gave me this plot. So this is a scatter plot, which is what we wanted, so that's great. And if for whatever reason yours was not automatically generated as a scatter plot, you can go into the chart editor over on the side, and right at the top here under Setup, you can change the chart type, and you'll just want to select the scatter chart. So we have the right type of chart, but it's not looking quite how I want it to just yet. So I was not expecting it to look basically like a straight line, because I know from just looking at my data that there were changes happening in the pressure as we changed the height, and I want that to be clearly reflected in my plot. So the issue here is actually the y-axis scale. So as you can see, Google Sheets automatically set the minimum at 0, which means that there's going to be lots of unused space on the y-axis because my values don't start until about 98,000. So if you think about it, it makes sense that on a scale from 0 all the way to 100,000, it would be really difficult or even impossible to see the changes that we measured, which are on a much smaller scale of only about a couple hundred pascals. So we're going to need to go in and change the axis scale manually. And to do that, we go over into the chart editor again, and this time we're going to go over to the Customize tab, and down near the bottom you'll see the vertical axis options. And here we can manually set our own minimum value. So my actual measured minimum value was about 98,600, so I'm going to go just a little bit lower than that, maybe 50 pascals lower than that at 98,550, and we'll see if that works. Okay, so that looks great. Now I can clearly see that as height is increasing, our pressure is steadily decreasing. And then the last step is just to make sure that you have an appropriate title and axis labels on your plot. And the last thing that step 6 asks is, does this plot look how you would expect it to, considering the formula above? So what I see from my plot, and yours might look a little bit different, but that's totally okay because we have different data. But looking at my plot, I see a very clearly negative linear relationship between pressure and height. And that is reflected in the formula above, right here, which is our known relationship between pressure and height. So now in step 7, we're going to use that scatter plot that we just made, and we're going to perform a linear regression, which will allow us to model our relationship between pressure and height using a linear equation, which seems like it should be a good fit because our data did look very linear. And then later we're going to use this model or this equation to infer quantities like the density of air where you took your measurements and the height of the edge of the atmosphere. So let's go ahead and do a simple linear regression in Google Sheets by adding a linear trend line. So to do that, I'm going to select my plot, and then back in this chart editor on the side, in the Customize options, we're going to go to Series, and then all the way at the bottom of those options, you'll see this trend line option here. So we're going to click that and make sure that the type is linear. And then for the label, we want to use equation. So now it'll show us the equation of the linear trend line. So for my data, I got a line with a slope of about negative 11.8 and a y-intercept of 98,732, which I actually remember was my pressure measurement at the ground level. And I just copy and pasted that equation into question 7 right here.